we can start class. Hopefully, hopefully, you were able to read at least most of what was assigned to you today. As I mentioned last time, if you hadn't read anything before our last class, which, you know, was probably some of you, could have been a lot of you, I don't know. Hi there. What's your name is? One more time. Yours. Hi there. Let me fix that. All right. Anyway, I mentioned if you had to read all of it, I know it was 100 pages, and I know there was groaning, and that's a hardship. But it's like 25 pages a day-ish. I felt like we could all do that. Now, whether or not you're successful is another matter, but the point is we are going to stick to those 100 pages today. And I say that because I got to check myself occasionally. I just sit down and read the whole book. I don't mess around with chapters, just read the book. And some of you are scoffing at that. Think about the hours you've spent doing like this. I don't mean collectively in your life. I mean like in an afternoon. You know, like those hours, you could just read a book or something. Anyway, point was I think you can do it. If you haven't yet done it, you still can. I want to start with a character who we mentioned last time. He figures somewhat prominently in the first couple chapters. Anyway, his name is Roland Weary. We have to deal with this too. Some of you will have different pagination. That's a fancy word for page numbers. There are a couple different copies of this. So like you have a smaller copy. Your page numbers are going to be different. It's the same story, same book, you know, page numbers are going to be different. It's usually, and I should write this down, but I forget to do things. It's like 10 pages off or something like that. We can solve it, probably. But if you have this size book, the page numbers I give you are going to be accurate. If you have a smaller one, we'll have to sort it out. We can do that real fast. What I first want to look at is page 44 in the big book. And to give you an idea of where that might be, it's pretty early, I think, in chapter 3. Oh, damn, I'm wrong. All right. It's got to be late in chapter 2 then.
What part are you looking for?
It's when we meet Weary.
Yeah, that's in chapter
2?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's kind of toward the
It's
end.
like the first 5 pages.
In chapter 2?
Pretty sure.
I did not flip nearly far enough then. Well, no, chapter 1 runs to like page 26, I think, so. 28.
Chapter 1 runs to page 22.
In yours?
Yeah.
So you're about 6 pages off. So, it's weird that yours is earlier. So I guess try around page 38 in the smaller books. If it helps too, it's right after the part we're going to look at. It's right after one of these section breaks, those 3 dots that you see a lot in the book. It's right after that. And the first words, conveniently, in the paragraph we're looking at is Roland Weary. Anybody find that in one of the tiny books? It's right after we talk about the tank.
35?
35?
And mine's on 34.
Roland Weary was only 18.
Yeah, 35.
35. So if you're in a tiny book, we're on 35. And how many pages? That's 9 pages. So yeah, we will use that math going forward. Be about 9 or 10 pages off. We'll make it work. All right. Point is, what I want to do today, mostly, I want to talk to you about ideas. Okay? There's a lot of ideas in this book. Mainly, as the narrator tells you, it's an anti-war novel. He's pretty upfront with his feelings about war. As the book goes on, we're going to see why. We're going to see some of the more horrific stuff he encountered, right? But that's not all the book is. It's full of people, Weary among them. We mentioned last time one of his more defining characteristics is that he's really into torture. So that's fun. But there's more to him than that, hopefully. And we get that on page 44. And what I'm curious about, I find talking about Weary to begin with is actually a really good way to warm up in terms of discussion, okay? So I'm going to read this paragraph at you. Please follow along. And I'm just curious, my main question at first is just, why are we getting this information? Like, what is this paragraph, right? Vonnegut could have not included it, but he did. So what do you think the reason for that is? All right. Roland Weary was only 18, was at the end of an unhappy childhood spent mostly in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He had been unpopular in Pittsburgh. He had been unpopular because he was stupid and fat and mean, and smelled like bacon no matter how much he washed. He was always being ditched in Pittsburgh by people who did not want him with them. It made Weary sick to be ditched. When Weary was ditched, he would find somebody who was even more unpopular than himself, and he would horse around with that person for a while, pretending to be friendly, and then he would find some pretext for beating the shit out of him. We go on with that. What is that? We have language for what that is. What are we getting about Weary? How would you describe that information?
Like his background?
Yeah, backstory, background. Why supply that here, do you think? Because, like, I mean, again, he figures somewhat prominently in these first couple chapters, but as the book goes on, I think, ooh, I don't want spoilers.
Yeah, in chapter 4. Yeah.
Okay, so if you're caught up, you know what happens. If you're not quite there, I'll leave it alone. Something happens to him. You might be able to intuit, given the context of the book, that it's not good. But something happens to him, and he's going to be less of a factor as the book goes on, right? So he's not even necessarily a major character. So why do you think we're including this backstory, this background information? What's the purpose of that?
Is it like world building or other things?
I mean, sure.
Low hanging fruit.
Huh?
Is that grasping out of low hanging fruit, or is it like bigger than that?
I mean, yeah. Well, because on some level, anything could be that, right? But why this guy? Why do we need to know this stuff about how this guy grew up?
Because it explains how he treats Billy.
What do you mean?
He's really kind of shitty to him.
He's an awful person. And even if you don't remember that, just those 2 paragraphs we read, like, what does he do with people? He finds people that are weaker and more unpopular than him.
And he beats them up.
He pretends to be their friend first, and then he beats them up. That's a terrible person.
Yeah.
But I like, it's not an apology for him, but it's a bit of an explanation, right?
Yeah, like rough life before he got into the army.
He was unpopular. Nobody likes him. He smells like bacon no matter how much he washes. That's not a good combo, you know? So, I point this out to you. It's going to happen a lot in the book. I'm not going to say it's necessarily every character. It's a lot of them, though. A lot of the characters you meet, even people that aren't major characters, are going to get a little bit of a backstory. And I think the narrator, on some level, wants you to see these people as people. Like, I've never had a student come up to me and be like, actually, I like Weary. That's not a thing that happens, okay? But he's not two-dimensional either, right? You can at least on some level understand, well, he's a piece of shit, but like, I kind of get it, given what we know about him, right? And I think that's purposeful, okay? And it's gonna keep happening. So I wanna point it out to you. Let's talk more about him. In the big book, we're gonna go to page 53. So for you guys in the little book, that is 7 pages ahead. And again, I'll try to give you some landmarks here. Help you find it a little bit. We're near another one of those section breaks. Right after the section break, that paragraph begins, Billy and the Scouts. If you guys find that in the tiny books. It's right after we learn about the horse picture. If you guys remember that one. I feel like that's pretty memorable. Yeah. Anyway, I'm actually going to start on 52. And look, if you can't necessarily find the page, it's okay. Just try to listen out. But all right. So this is right after Weary assumes he's the leader because he's busier than everyone. We're at the paragraph that is, he was so hot and bundled up. Okay. He, Weary, was so hot and bundled up, in fact, he had no sense of danger. His vision of the outside world was limited to what he could see through a narrow slit between the rim of his helmet and his scarf from home, which concealed his baby face from the bridge of his nose on down. He was so snug in there that he was able to pretend he was safe at home, having survived the war, and that he was telling his parents and his sister a true war story, whereas the true war story was still going on. There's a lot in that short section, by the way. But the most glaring to me, well, I'm gonna ask you guys. Does anything stand out to you from that paragraph? Anything, again, the same way we talk about some of Fairchild's stuff, is anything phrased in an interesting way? Does there seem to be anything that we could talk a little more about? Yeah.
Why the true war story was still going on seems kind of important.
Well, yeah, he says, I mean, to help people that don't have the page, he, being weary, you know, he's imagining he's back at home, was telling his parents and his sister a true war story, whereas the true war story was still going on. So the narrator repeats that phrase, you know, probably purposefully, wants us thinking about something. What's the point you think he's making there? Saying he's imagining weary, is imagining he's at home, he's telling his people his true war story, but he's living it as he's imagining this. The narrator's trying to have you realize something about that. I'll lead you a little bit. What might be the problem with Weary imagining the story, because we're going to read it here in a second, imagining the story he's going to tell his people while he's still in that story? What's the problem?
He's assuming he's going to make it back.
He's assuming any number of things. He doesn't know how his story is going to go, right? It's like if you're sitting here right now scripting your memoir of your college years. You're in it. You don't know. Some of you could be great scholars. Some of you could be Russian gymnasts 10 years from now. We don't know. You don't know. But I think the narrator wants you to recognize that. With that phrasing, he's trying to signal to you, hey, this guy is not into it maybe as much as he should be. For instance, let's read that actual story he's going to tell. Weary's version of the true war story went like this. There was a big German attack, and Weary and his anti-tank buddies fought like hell until everybody was killed but Weary, so it goes. And then Weary tied in with 2 scouts, and they became close friends immediately. They decided to fight their way back to their own lines. They were going to travel fast. They were damned if they'd surrender. They shook hands all around. They called themselves the 3 Musketeers. But then this damn college kid, that's Billy, who was so weak he shouldn't even have been in the army, asked if he could come along. He didn't even have a gun or a knife. He didn't even have a helmet or a cap. He couldn't even walk right. Kept bobbing up and down, driving everybody crazy, giving their position away. He was pitiful. The 3 Musketeers pushed and carried and dragged the college kid all the way back to their own lines. Weary's story went. They saved his goddamn hide for him. What kind of story is that? Like the tone of it.
Hero's narrative.
Weary's a hero in the story. Yeah. In the end, they saved his goddamn Billy. They saved his hide for him, right? So he's a savior figure. And that's not untrue. I mean, again, if you cast your mind back, Billy does have to be sort of drug along through the entire book, but in this section especially. So Weary could argue he saves him, perhaps. Okay.
That was his choice.
What do you mean?
That was Weird's choice to save him.
It was. It doesn't seem like something Billy wants. In fact, Billy expressly is like, please leave me, repeatedly.
And it doesn't seem like the scouts also give a shit about him either.
They don't. He says they're friends. They are not friends. And if you're not sold on that, very quickly after this, they do what to him?
They ditch him.
They ditch him. The thing he hates that always happens. They ditch him. They're like, dude, you guys suck.
Bye.
We're out of here. And by the way, those guys die.
Yeah.
So, it is Germany in World War II. It's not a very safe place to be. But, so already there's kind of 2 major holes in his story, right? Number 1, they're not friends. And they never were. And 2, he does save Billy, but against Billy's wishes. And that kind of calls into question his motivation, right? Why is Weary doing this?
Because he wants to be the hero.
Yeah. He doesn't give a shit about Billy. Again, a couple pages from here, he's going to do the thing he does after he gets ditched. He's going to beat the shit out of Billy in a ditch. That's how they get discovered, by German soldiers. And by the way, Vonnegut tells you all this. He's like, oh, this is what, and then sure enough, that's what happens. So we're going to go ahead and say his true war story isn't necessarily true. But then why is this the story he's telling his folks?
So they'll look fun. believe him and don't give a shit about him.
That's part of it. And again, we all want to seem, you know.
Because he's a loser.
He is. No, he is. Importantly, he is. I don't think we ever actually. They may not even have that word like we have it now, right? This book is in the '60s, but
That's
yeah.
how they described him.
No, he is. He full on is. He is, and he doesn't like that, and he takes it out on people, and he's gonna make himself look better. Absolutely. You had your hand up.
I think this is where he wants to like make himself believe.
Sure. Well, and that comes back to that phrase I highlighted for you guys a moment ago. He's telling his people, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, a true war story, whereas the true war story was still going on. So he's in the middle of contradictory information. And we've named a few of those things, right? He sees all that, takes that information in, and his brain goes, we can spin some of that, we can fix that. We can make you look good, buddy. Right? A big part of it, again, is just the human factor. We all want to feel better about ourselves. Yes. There's more to it than that. Okay? This is a hero's narrative, yes? Okay. We can get a little more specific. Think about the tone, especially. Some of these phrases. They saved his goddamn hide for him. He talks about the Three Musketeers. He says they were damned if they'd surrender. Who talks like that? People don't really talk like that.
Yeah, it's like a weird like conquering story, like about like it's the Odyssey.
You know what God complex is?
Well, kind of. You guys are not wrong to attach it to myth, but I'll tell it to you this way. We don't really talk much about myths these days. You could say we have modern day versions of myths that we encounter all the time. Not so much me because I have kids and I can't get out anymore, but you guys do this a lot. What are the modern day myths you guys encounter all the time? I've seen people do it in the middle of class, actually. Pretty fucking insulting, if I'm being honest. What are our modern day myths? Stories we tell about heroes. Use phrases like goddamn hide, be damned if they surrender. Who talks like that?
Like war stories from like
Yeah, but you guys don't read. Where do you encounter war stories?
grandparents' fellas.
No, you don't talk to old people. You don't. I don't either. They're spooky.
Social media.
Movies. Movies. You guys watch them all the time. You all saw the Avengers, all 20 of them, or whatever.
No, I didn't.
You saw something. You can't escape it. Okay, then you saw something else. Those are our myths. Those are our stories. Those are our heroes. Right? And they talk like that. Now again, this is a book from the 60s. They sound maybe a little bit different. But it's that mode. We saved his goddamn hide. You could, like a guy coming, you see by standing on a hill, sun's coming up always, right? Like, we have this still, right? And I bring up movies specifically because I think that's what is also part of Weary's imagination. How do you know, to bring it back to our conversation before class, how do you know how to tell the stories you tell? Well, it's based on the stories you've read or seen, right? Weary's full of these movies. He's full of them. He's an 18-year-old kid. That's the prime of your movie watching experience. I say all that to say, have we encountered this before in the book? This question about war movies.
Aaron, his wife.
Mary.
Yeah.
She is deeply invested in a conversation about war movies and their effects, right? Does anybody remember what she says or what she's so worried about?
Then like glorifying war and getting young kids to go sign up for the army. I think the line was like, "You were babies when he signed up, and you're gonna get our babies to go sign up for the next one."
You'll make it look stylish and fun.
Frank Sinatra's gonna.
John Wayne, actors who say things like his goddamn hide. I probably sound a lot cooler since my throat still isn't. They say things like that in those old movies. They do. And then, lo and behold, you have this character who is falling into the exact trap that Mary was worried about, right? And here's my favorite part. We got to talk about this in two ways. First of all, and we're going to talk more about this, but I just want to highlight something else from these earlier paragraphs. His vision, weary, of the outside world was limited to what he could see through a narrow slit between the rim of his helmet, okay, and his scarf from home, which concealed his baby face from the bridge of his nose. So he sees through here, right? We say his vision was limited. On the surface, that just means he can't see great, okay? But enter for a moment with me the land of metaphor. If we consider that this might be a metaphor, right? You do encounter those from time to time. What might Vonnegut and or the narrator be trying to say about weary? And I just lost my place in the book. What? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
You fuck me. Go ahead.
Sorry.
I'm done. Go ahead.
His views on life are like limited because he's so young and he's like kind of like curating his own reality where he's like some conquering war hero.
Absolutely the second part. And I'm not sure everybody necessarily heard because they're laughing at the stupid thing I said. He's curating, I like that verb especially, his own war experience. Again, as the narrator says, he's telling his people a true war story, whereas the true war story was still going on. It's clouding his vision. He doesn't see correctly. We've already talked about how his war story is not accurate, right? If you're behind enemy lines, probably anywhere, but especially in wartime Germany, you want to see shit for what it is, right? That could be important. And he's not. And as we've alluded to in chapter 4, I suppose, it comes for him. It matters that he gets it wrong. A lot. So this is dangerous. He has signed up for the story he tells us. He lives a different one, just like Mary's worried about. And he dies for it. That's a spoiler, sorry. I figured, you know. But the other part of this, his vision of the outside world was limited. We've talked about that, right? That makes sense. You don't see well. To what he could see through, when we talk about the helmet, and his scarf from home. Now look, that is a minute detail. I am not necessarily saying you guys got to comb through the book and find me phrases like scarf from home, okay? But I want to show you for just a second that it is possible. Understand this. He could just say scarf. Why does it matter that it's from home? Why does it matter?
His home life sucks.
I mean, maybe, but the scarf is fine, you know. That's true, and that could possibly tie into he's thinking a lot about his people and it's a distraction. Like, it could be some of that going on, perhaps. But again, we would get that with just bringing up his people. So again, I would say, I mean, we don't, because again, the seat of the argument I'm going to start to build for you here is we do not have to say the scarf comes from home, because it's just a scarf, right? And even if some of those other ideas, which are valid, if the author wanted to bring them up, he does that with the other information. So, right, it's weird, and this is the point I'm making to you. It should stand out a little bit when we say a thing like scarf from home. For instance, if I asked Stefan, hey man, the thing you got on your head, blah, 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 what's that? And you're like, oh, it's a hat I got from home. I'm like, I didn't ask where you keep your clothes. Right? Like, it's weird information, is my point. Oftentimes, not all the time, oftentimes, weird information like that can be intentional. Like, it's there for a reason, okay? And you guys have thrown out a couple hypotheses which are valid, okay? So we'll let those lie. There's another one, though. Scarf from home. We find out a couple pages previous to this. You guys will remember it. Oh, yeah, if you turn the page, at least in the big book, you'll see it. We hear about, in great detail, I guess Weary's inventory. And I say you guys should remember this if you've read to this point because it's awful.
Yeah.
It's awful. It's a whole paragraph, or maybe two. It's a lot. It's two, technically, of just all the shit Weary has. All of it. It's not entertaining. It's fun to me. It's fun for me every time I read through the book. I skip that paragraph, but I like thinking about you guys having to read it. It is fun for me. Huh?
It was something.
Yeah. But again, I would say Vonnegut's a famous author. You may or may not feel the book. I mean, that's kind of secondary to our discussion. This is the sort of thing in a workshop you would go, hey bro, don't do this. We don't need it. Cut this. Nobody likes it. But he kept it. So again, I would say, well, it feels intentional to have this insane list of things. He must be trying to make a point about something, okay? Scarf from Home echoes this. The scarf from home is part of all this, right? I'm gonna ask a stupid question first. Where's the scarf come from?
Home.
Thank you. What else does he bring with him from home?
No scary fucking knife.
Yeah, well, I mean, not too specific. I mean, all these things he's brought with him, okay? Yeah. Well, we just said the vision being limited. I mean, I said it, but you guys didn't seem to disagree. The vision being limited was a metaphor, right? He's not seeing well, literally and figuratively. Might the scarf from home, might the things from home also be a metaphor? And if so, then what?
So that he's still like thinking on that one, so he's not focused on what he should be focused on.
Well, I mean, that doesn't complete the metaphor. The question would be, what else other than physical materials does he bring with him from home? You do this too, by the way. We all do. Some of you are fading right now, so you may not be able to handle this question. The rest of you, what'd you bring with you? Your phones, obviously. Book, hopefully. Maybe a pen. Some of you have no way to write right now. And I'm like, what are you doing? Paper, jacket, clothes. That's a good idea. What else did you bring with you?
Stuff to prepare you for class.
Like what?
Like whatever you need.
Yeah. Other than that stuff, what else did you bring?
Emotion.
Huh?
Emotion.
Okay, now we're diving into your head, right? You brought with you all manner of things, right? And now if we're going to specify it a little bit, if we're in this arena, and we're saying, what did you bring with you from home? I don't mean your dorm or wherever you're staying right now. I mean your home, right? What do you bring with you? You take this everywhere, right?
What our parents taught us.
Usually, especially at this age. It usually takes you a little while before you realize they were wrong about most things.
Yeah.
Your beliefs.
Worldview.
Yeah, you take that with you. And it comes from home, right? Weary's bringing all kinds of things from home. I would argue that's why it's phrased that way. The scarf from home. That's intentional. He wants you thinking about what else has come along for the ride. Stuff he didn't even pick, you know? It's his shitty childhood in Pittsburgh. He brought it with him. And some of that shitty childhood, to hear Mary tell it, was these movies, these war stories, where they saved goddamn hides and things like this. And to complete the metaphor, it limits his vision. Doesn't see correctly. Because he brought all that shit with him. Well muted, I appreciate it. That's it. All right, so that's weary. There's another thing I want to talk about. Yeah, to make sure we have time, we might need to. I'm going to do it at the end. There's a thing I like to do at the end. You guys will really love it. That's a joke for me. I want to switch gears a little bit. I told you already, there's all kinds of ideas. So, first of all, to cap this one off, the discussion around war and the narrative we have for it, like how it's presented, what that effect can be on particularly young folks, because, for instance, if we end up in another war, God forbid, where there's like a draft or something, they're not coming for me. I aged out. With you guys. So, anyway, pray for peace. But the point is, guys like Weary sign up having the wrong idea, right? And it's not fair. It's not fair. Feels like a trick. Yeah? According to the book, according to these characters. Another idea, we're going to go to page 109 in the big book, And this is actually conveniently right at the end of chapter 4. So if you're in a tiny book, if you can find chapter 5 or get to the end of chapter 4, figure that out. But it is actually the last page of chapter 4, okay? At this point, we have finally met the Tralfamadorians. These are the aliens in the book. Like we mentioned last time, it is weird. It's pretty weird that in the middle of a World War II novel, there would be aliens. On the one hand, I told you last time, Vonnegut is really kooky. He likes doing stuff like this. He just does. I can't blame him for it. It makes the book more fun. But it's also strange, right? You can kind of think about this a little bit. He's told us repeatedly, and is indicating now in different ways as you read, you may not even realize it until we talk about it. This is an anti-war novel. This is serious stuff, right? He at some point he's going to talk about like no wars ever more, right? Like he wants to put a stop to it if he can. Why do we have fucking aliens, man? What the wouldn't that, like in your rhetoric class that maybe you had in 1101, wouldn't that kind of damage his argument? The gravity of it? To bring in these cartoon characters? Yeah. That's a fair point. It's weird. Well, hopefully something else is going on there. Hopefully. We can't have that full conversation until we read the book because they're going to do more stuff. But it's worth thinking about. What we're talking about here at the end of chapter 4, Billy, he's talking to the aliens and they're just having a conversation. Billy says, "Where am I?" The alien says, "You're trapped in another blob of amber. We're going to Tralfamador." He says, "How did I get here?" Billy does. The alien says, "It would take another Earthling to explain it. Earthlings are the great explainers, explaining why this event is structured as it is, telling how other events may be achieved or avoided. I'm a Tralfamadorian, seeing all time as you might see a stretch of the Rocky Mountains. All time is all time." That's one of those very wise things that doesn't really mean much. "It does not change. It does not lend itself to warnings or explanations. It simply is. Take it moment by moment, and you will find that we are all, as I've said before, bugs in amber." Billy says, "You sound to me as though you don't believe in free will." And then the Tralfamadorian basically says, "I don't." First thing we got to solve, because sometimes students are confused. I promise this is not as perplexing as it may seem to some of you, okay? But the Tralfamadorians are going to keep coming up, and pretty much every time they come up, they're going to talk like this, okay? So we got to make sense of this real quick. What is the Tralfamadorian describing? He says he sees all time as all time. It does not change. It does not lend itself to warnings or explanations. It simply is. Time does not change. He can see all of it. What's he describing, do you think? His view of time.
It's kind of like predestination. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? We can't do this.
He's talking about fate. He's talking about destiny, right? These are ideas we have. Some of you may even adhere to it to some degree, which is strange all on its own, by the way. If you're the type that thinks, "Oh yeah, maybe, yeah, I believe in destiny, kind of." That's an all or nothing proposition. There's no kind of destiny. Why is that? Billy makes this point. What's like the fundamental aspect to fate? If fate is a thing, then what cannot exist?
Free will.
Choice. I hate to say it this way. You did not choose to be in this room right now. Some of you are like, "Yep." But more than that, you didn't choose anything. You may think you did. I forget, somebody, you came over with that big ass milkshake coffee thing. You chose that this morning. Fate would say, "It was written in the stars that you on this day," right? Like that's how fate works. Down to the minutia of your life. You don't choose any of it. We don't like that very much, usually. You like think you have choice, you have power. We talked about this a little bit with a little boy, right? With the discussion of little boy, we talked about all the ways that, if you really think about it for a second, we don't have a lot of choice. And actually, I would counter, given the sort of walking commercial that our lives have become, I don't know how much you actually chose to get that either. But that's not what the Tralfamadorian is talking about. He's going beyond that, right? He is saying all time is all time. That we only, because we don't see time as they do, like literally we don't see it as they do, we only think we have free will when in fact we don't. That's going to keep happening. Again, every time the Tralfamadorians come up, they're going to talk about free will. Eventually, they're going to sway Billy. He's going to start believing them. He's going to, because I mean, that's what Billy does. He has no actual ideas of his own. But he's like, okay, I guess not. So tell me what I'm supposed to do anyway, right? The reason I bring this up to you, other than wanting to help you with the aliens, because they're very concerned with free will and fate. Again, it feels intentional. We already pointed out how in this book, they make no sense. They make zero sense appearing in a story like this, right? But it's interesting that with every appearance, they have one idea that they are going to make to you every single time. They want you thinking about fate, free will, and apparently that has something to do with war. Apparently. And again, unfortunately, that's not a full conversation we can have until we read more of the book. But they're going to keep coming. This question about fate, okay? So it's worth taking notice of. What time is it, by the way? Thank you. Okay. There's one more thing I want to draw your attention to, and then the fun, sort of, honest to God, it feels like a magician's trick we're going to do at the end of class. So get excited. Sorry I have to do this, by the way. It's the only way I can breathe. All right. There is one more, I guess you could call it sort of pattern that's going to crop up in the book. And for that, I guess, we'll just do one example. In the big book, I love calling it that, it's going to be on page 89. This is right at the end of chapter 3. It's like the penultimate page, second to last page in chapter 3, at least in the big book. So, at this point, Billy and Weary have been captured, okay? They are on prisoner of war trains. They are heading to a camp. I assume you all at least know enough to know that being on a train to a camp in Germany at this point in time is not good. I know, but yeah, it's not great. It's not great for them. And the description of the train sounds pretty fucking terrible, actually. And then, again, we get this. Amid all the actual horror, because there is that, we get this. And I call these alarm bells. Anytime you encounter something like this in a text, even if you don't know what to make of it at first, which is fine, you have to try to train yourself to take notice of oddities. This is odd. Even though Billy's train wasn't moving because they parked, its boxcars were kept locked tight. Nobody was to get off until the final destination. To the guards who walked up and down outside, each car became a single organism, which ate and drank and excreted through its ventilators. It talked or sometimes yelled through its ventilators too. In went water and loaves of black bread and sausage and cheese, and out came shit and piss and language. I dare say that's the oddest description of a train you've ever heard. Clearly, this is some kind of a metaphor to describe a train in this fashion, because it's so strange. He's comparing it to something. Other than a train, because somebody's going to come at me with that. What are these trains? What is he drawing a comparison? And again, I'll read some of the finer points back to you. Each car became a single organism, which ate and drank and excreted through its ventilators. It talked or sometimes yelled through its ventilators too. In went water and loaves of black bread and sausage and cheese, and out came shit and piss and language. Yeah. Yeah. Now, without the language bit, we would just say they're animals. But the language makes it people. These are people, these trains are. And, it's a little bodily. It's a little gross. Sorry about that. But that is one of the aspects of being an animal. In through the ventilators of these trains go food and drink, and out come the things that come out as a result of that, and language. These trains are people, which is odd. We don't have to answer this question today, but I'm gonna try. Why do you think we're comparing these trains all of a sudden to people? That's weird, yeah?
Because there's people inside them.
Yeah, but we say that.
Yeah.
But we literally, just for a minute here, make these trains into people. Another way to frame that would be, we talk about these trains like they're people, right? Metaphors are always double-sided. You may not realize this. Obviously, you're comparing two unlike things. You all took senior lit, you made flashcards, you were very proud of yourselves. But the function of a metaphor is the ability to consider both sides. Oftentimes, when you guys probably were taught them or talked about them, you only talked about one side of it. It's a two-way street. So we're saying trains are like people in the metaphor. That also means what?
People aren't seen as people.
Well, people are like trains. That's how metaphors work. If you allow the metaphor to go in one direction, that trains can be described as people. If you agree that that works in how it's written, you are tacitly agreeing it can work in the other direction. I agree it's weird. I fully agree that it's weird. But it was weird to begin with, right? Again, though, the question becomes, why? Why are trains like people? Why are we saying people are like trains? What on earth could be the point of that? Or the bigger idea, or take it back to what you guys think qualifies as argument. What theme might that tie into? To talk about trains as if they're people, or people as if they're trains. How does a train work?
It's on a track.
Runs on a track.
Can't change its direction really without somebody else interfering.
That's interesting.
So it kind of like ties into the idea of fate, of how we're on the same track, we can't do anything about it.
It might have something to do with that. It might echo a little bit the larger discussion it seems like this book is trying to have about fate and free will and choice. Yeah. I mean, here again, especially once they're on that train, they ain't choosing shit. They ain't choosing much of anything. But even before the train, take it back. Did they choose? They were like, let's go on a vacation to Germany. Bring your guns. No. If they were drafted, obviously that wasn't a choice. Even if they weren't. If you're in the 1930s and you're like an 18, 19-year-old man, because women couldn't serve at that time, and they hadn't started drafting yet, how much of a choice is it really to sign up?
Not really any.
There's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like,
Come on, let's see.
well, you can say that maybe. Yeah. But no, that frame of mind for sure. And then you still walk it back further. Now we're talking about the war narratives we have, these movies we talked about. When does choice really begin in that train? Pardon the pun. I'm not sure, but it runs a good long ways before you find it. So it seems like the Tralfamadorians might have maybe a little bit of a point. Maybe. But again, that's going to keep happening. I have phrased it in the past like machined people. And it usually happens in really small spots. So this one's really obvious. Trains are like people. You should be like, what? Another moment where it happens, I can't remember where it is. It might be right after this. No, right before this. When Weary is, quote, beating the shit out of Billy in the trench when they get caught. For a moment, the narrator talks about a tube of wires in Billy's back, a tube of important wires. That's your spine, right? But he talks about it like again, like a machine. And he says Weary was going to break that tube. You're like, oh shit. But other than that, we're also, just for a second, talking about Billy like he's a machine, like he's a robot. It's going to happen a lot. I just want you, again, if nothing else, to be aware of it. because it seems purposeful. Okay. All right. Last thing we're gonna do. God, I'm still good at this. We got time. I can't manage time in my life. I guess I've been doing this long enough, an hour and 15 minutes, man. I can just nail where we need to be. What a sad skill that is. It's not applicable to anything else, you know. All right, page number. Look at me talking cocky. I didn't write the page number down. Hang on. Oh, page 43. These are notes. All of this. You should take notes. Anyway, page 43 in the big book. I will try to help the tiny book folks, because this is important. This magic trick we're about to do. This is, again, right before. This is actually technically when we meet Weary. The page we looked at earlier was on the next page when we talked about his backstory. Guys with the tiny book, do you remember what page that was with Roland's backstory? It was 30 something. It was like 36, I think. Is that right?
34.
34? Ah, hell with it. Anyway, it's right before that page, give or take. This is actually immediately after one of those section breaks. Here in the big book on page 43, you have that section break. You got a little paragraph which begins, Weary was as new to war as Billy. Cool. All right, let me get some water first, because I'm talking a lot. All right, so we're going to meet Weary here. We're going to talk about the backstory after this, but we're going to meet him here. So this is our first impression of Weary, right? He was as new to war as Billy. He was a replacement too. First of all, we've talked about replacements, not in class, but in this book. What does it mean that Weary's a replacement? Does anybody catch on to that?
Was it like somebody died, they sent him in?
Yeah, he just got there too. He's going to act like he's the leader. He's going to act like he's hot shit. He just got there too. He has no idea. Just another little fun aspect of Weary. Anyway, he was a replacement too. As part of a gun crew, he had helped to fire one shot in anger from a 57mm anti-tank gun. The gun made a ripping sound like the opening of the zipper on the fly of God Almighty. The gun lapped up snow and vegetation with a blowtorch 30 feet long. The flame left a black arrow on the ground, showing the Germans exactly where the gun was hidden. The shot was a miss. And then, of course, you either remember or you can intuit what happens next. They only fire one shot. They leave an arrow on the ground. It doesn't go well after that. What I'm interested in, here just for a minute, entertain me. Bottom of 43, onto the top of 44. If I asked you to write me a body paragraph on this paragraph, what's some of the language you might pull? Does anything seem significant to you in this paragraph? Does anything stand out as potentially interesting, weird? What about it?
They describe it very good.
What about it? Again, anything in particular?
He's just like a little kid holding on to these big guns.
That made a ripping sound,
Like what?
The fly of God.
God.
That's weird. That's weird. Right? That's odd. I can't figure out which one of these works. I'm going to try this one. How many of you wrote that down in your notes? Don't raise your hands. Exactly. Let's talk about this. First of all, we got to get it up on the board. Let's see. The gun made a ripping sound. What is it now? Like the opening? Slow down, slow down. Like the opening of, we also need a probe switch. The opening of the zipper on the fly. Thank you. Oh, and we are dying right here at the end of it. All right. First of all, if we were to quote this, quick review. What's some of the things we need? We need a couple things before we can talk about it. Need quotation marks. Yeah. What else?
And a citation and like page number.
So it'll be Vonnegut. And this is, at least in the big book, 43 to 4. Okay. What else do we need before we can talk about it? And one more thing. Some of you don't do this, is why I'm stressing it. What do you need for a quotation if it's in a paper? Perhaps it goes before the quotation. What do you need?
A line break. I'm thinking of poetry.
You need context. You need context. We need to know how we arrived at this information in the original text, right? Because this is just going to show up in your paper, and as a reader, I'm going to go, okay. Like, what are we talking about here in this quotation? Like, literally, what are we talking about?
A tank.
An anti-tank gun. A gun meant to kill tanks. Okay? So that's probably going to be part of our context. Now, we get a little more specific. Because I don't think, as Stefan pointed out, it's a weird description. But it's also actually not super detailed. You don't, just from this, you don't really know what the gun looks like, right? Get any visuals. What are we talking about? What are we describing actually when it comes to this gun? What it sounds like. Apparently it's real loud. And again, to my earlier point, we could have just said the gun was real loud. We don't do that. We say it this way. So that seems intentional. But for context, describes the sound of Weary's anti-tank gun. Obviously, it's not a complete sentence. We'd have to, but you get it. This is the context we need for this quotation, right? Now, we can try to talk about the quotation. Of this quotation, obviously some words are a little more interesting than others. What might some of those words be? Does anything stand out to you guys here? Okay, I'll give you that. That's an interesting verb. Yeah. What else?
Zipper.
Gotta find it. Possibly.
I feel like opening's kind of an interesting one.
Okay. I mean, also a verb. Also a verb. Okay. What else? We're just gonna throw a couple out there. I want to figure something out real quick. You gotta, right? We're talking about, well, markers that worked. We're talking about anti-tank guns, and all of a sudden we're talking about God Almighty somehow. That feels out of left field, right? Anything else? There's at least one more that I think is fly. It's not the bug. It's not. It's something else. That's kind of weird. It's kind of weird in context, right? If we were just talking about zippers and we're having a long discussion about pants for some reason, this wouldn't be that interesting. But this is one word from that. That's interesting. So it's probably worth taking note, right? What we've kind of sorted out, really, is all this, right? Is interesting. A ripping sound like the opening of the zipper on the fly of God Almighty. Before we can talk about all of it, because we're going to, I'm first interested in what might be any of the connotations. Some of these words, some of these phrases. To me, the easiest one to start with is this. The phrase, God Almighty. I think because the narrator could just say God if it really wanted to. Well, we get his full name here, right? Why? What's that about, do you think? To say it like that. What might we be trying to communicate with that phrase?
That it was very powerful.
Power. All powerful, in fact, right? For sure, for sure. So whatever we discuss, when it comes to this quotation, it seems like in some way, shape, or form, I really need a more powerful marker. It seems like we're thinking about power, right? Man, there were markers in this room and somebody jacked them. That is not cool. Anyway, absolutely. And weirdly, like a formal power, right? Like, not to get too in the weeds, but because like that would give you power. This is like, all right, Mr. Almighty, like this is, you know? Like this, people talk about God like that in churches where they like chant and shit. There's candles, right? Like it's, I'm serious. I mean, I'm joking, but I'm also serious. Like, that's an interesting way to put it. So we're very concerned with power. Okay. Now, though, there are some contexts, again, where that would not be interesting. If we were in a church with candles and chanting and shit, and I brought up, we would not spend much time on this, because that's kind of what the whole deal is. But where we get this phrase, and its connotations of supreme power, come after this. So now we got to talk about this. First of all, I guess spare me one moment for fly. What is that? It's not the bug.
Or the zipper.
Yeah, but more than that, like to say it like that, because we also say zipper, like it's a little bit redundant. What kind of word is that in this context? It's very, what? It's not even a word you guys probably use much really anymore. It's more like my generation thing.
It's informal.
Good. We just talked about how we get his full name. It's very formal. If he had business cards, maybe that, right? But right before the fly, you know? So we have this mixing of the most formal and probably the height of informality, to be quite honest. That's interesting too. Again, that seems intentional. At this stage, I do not know what we're going to say about it. But we have some options for further analysis, further thinking going for us here. By the way, the fancier way to talk about formal sort of joined with the informal, you'll sometimes hear this referred to as the sacred and the profane. Okay? This is something artists have been doing for thousands of years. The sacred and the profane. Now, let's talk a little bit about profanity. My favorite subject. What are we literally looking at? Literally. Just remind us. What are we looking at here? What are we describing?
Like anti-tank gun.
The sound of an anti-tank gun. And we put it in a really weird way. And we're going to talk about why that might be. But first, we got to talk a little more about why it's so strange, the way that we're putting it. And I got to do this one more time, and I'm very sorry. For those keeping score at home, there's nothing happening here. It's just opening my nose so I can like breathe for a minute. I know some of you, it's not a pleasant thing I'm doing, but anyway. That's what's actually going on, right? But again, this is a metaphor, but it's technically a simile because we use like. Again, remember your flashcards. What's the other half of the simile? We get that half. What are we describing here? We're comparing that to this. But a lot of you have not entertained what this is.
Dipping your pants down.
Yeah. Whose pants?
God.
God's pants. Yeah. By the way, those of you who are finally taking notes, like this shit's going on the eval. I didn't write the book, okay? The point I'm trying to make to you here, if nothing else, is you missed this when you read.
Yeah.
You went right past it. That should be noteworthy for you. So we're comparing the sound of this gun, which is very loud, to the sound of God unzipping his pants. Right? Okay. Already, I would hope your brain is screaming, why? This is a good question. That's a good question. Attempting to answer that question is the beginning of analysis, right? Why the fuck is probably your second question. Again, that's where analysis happens. It's not always easy, and even right now you're thinking, well, I don't know. That's okay. But that's how you start. You got to notice this stuff, okay? And not all of it. You miss stuff. I miss stuff. I read this book every semester. Every semester I'm like, I didn't see that before. Like, it happens, okay? But this one, you got to see it. You got to see it. I know you didn't before. You got to start trying to see this stuff, okay? You got to do your best not to glaze over when you're reading. You got to see this stuff. God just unzipped his pants on page 43. That's a big deal. Now, to try to answer that question. Why? I have thoughts. Number one, this is the part you guys are going to appreciate. You'll see when we get there. I refer to God as a he. Classically speaking, that's been like what people have done. 2022, people are less sold on that distinction, which is fair. But I feel pretty confident it's a he in this context. Why?
Talking about like flies.
Yeah, well, especially in the 60s, I mean, you had some women rocking pants and what, but it wasn't as, it just wasn't as prevalent. It wasn't stylistically the thing women did back then. Well, actually, this is about the 40s, so like even less so then, right? So we're probably talking about a male divine figure, I suppose. Yeah. Why else? Pardon the pun, we got more ammunition there. What are we describing again? What kind of gun? Big fucking gun.
Yeah.
Now look, you guys on some level know what guns look like. My 6-year-old loves a Nerf. You know, like you know what a gun. But this is not one of those. This isn't like a pew pew. Like this is an anti-tank gun. This is a cannon. Okay? Here's what it looks like. Where am I going to put this? I'll put it over here. So guns this big, they're going to be based, okay? Because they have to they got to kill a tank. Puts out a lot of power. Big shell. It has to be balanced. So it's got a big base, right? And then you got the cylinder, barrel. What is this anti-tank gun?
Looks like a dick.
Say it with your chest, please.
Looks like a dick.
What kind of dick?
A big one.
No, well, yes. There's a reason for this. People are jumping conclusions right now about the kind of person I am. I want you to slow down. There's a reason for this. But we got to do this first. Other than a large penis.
Mm-hmm.
What other kind of penis is this? God's penis. God Almighty. All powerful. Penis. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you would rightfully wonder, why? That's a fair question. To help answer that question, we first got to think about, who is saying this? Who talks like this? God's penis, what the fuck? Like, who are we talking about here on page 43?
Weary.
Huh?
Weary.
We're talking about Weary. And we've seen already, from the limited cast of characters we have to this point, he is the most likely to say things like this, right? You think of his true war story, which is going to happen in about 10 pages from now. Saved his goddamn hide, damned if we'd surrender, right? He sounds like those characters from those movies who talk like that, very grandiose. You called them godlike earlier. Are you okay? Mm-hmm. Okay. This sounds like Weary. But it's the narrator talking. How can it be? I want to help you here for just a second, because I've read this book a lot. This is what's known as an omniscient third-person narrator, okay? Now, what's weird about that, because Vonnegut is weird, is the narrator is also in the story. He's also a character. So you're going to get some first person mixed in too, unfortunately. But the narrator's not here in this scene. He is not. So he's third person. And as with most omniscient third person narrators, he can dive into different characters' heads. He can help you see how they see the world. We just spent an earlier part of class talking about how Weary is seeing the world. We talked about how it's not accurate, and that's going to be a problem for him later. This is how Weary sees the world. This is how Weary talks. When he fired that gun, it was God's penis going off. Now, for just a minute, I know we probably got, 7 minutes left?
Yeah.
Damn, I'm good. Is it 7 exactly? Fuck. I'm getting old. Why do you think? This is argument now. Now we can finally, with 6 minutes, start trying to, why do you think Weary thinks like this? Sees the world, describes the world like this? You can almost hear him saying that, right, in a foxhole, or to his dad. Not the women folk, but to his dad later on. It was like the zipper on the fly of God Almighty, Papa. Yeah, but we got to get more specific. Like, cool in what way?
It's like a baby screen.
Yeah. Well, and that draws us into a larger conversation of why are people in movies talking like this, right? But even so, why are they doing that? What are we communicating about a character when they say something like this? Or to bring it back to Weary, because we mentioned before how he's trying to puff himself up, right? What is he, you think, trying to make himself sound like? Huh?
Maybe some badass.
Okay, that's a little more specific than cool. That's a kind of cool. A badass.
Oh.
That's a certain kind of cool. Let's get more, because again, in a paper you couldn't say he wants to be a badass. Like, we gotta, what is a badass? What is that?
Like bravado.
Do what now?
Bravado.
Bravado.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is that? Some people don't actually know what you mean by that.
I'd just say like just a typical masculine dude.
Oh, now we're a little more specific,
You know?
right? The specific kind of cool we're talking about is supremely masculine, right? How do you know I'm like a bad dude? Well, I was in Germany, fucking with Nazis and shit. You might have heard of them. I was in charge of God's penis. I wielded it, the power. For sure. Look, when you break it down, and by the way, this is one of the hallmarks of like real capital M masculinity a lot of the time. When you break it down to its constituent parts and you look at it in a scholarly fashion, it is ridiculous. It is. I'm not defending that part. It is ridiculous. But this is how Weary sees the world. This is how Weary talks about the world. This is how Weary talks about himself, right? And the upshot is, here right at the end, it seems like he brings that with him from home. He gets it from the movies, right? They say crap like that. How does Weary know what it is to be a man? He's 18. These are not shots fired. You're 18, man. I didn't know anything. I barely know anything now. I definitely did when I was 18.
You saw it in movies.
That's all you know. What you know of the world. Your parents told you some stuff. You saw a ton of movies. Think about how many hours you've probably spent on Netflix. Is that as many hours as you spent talking to your parents? Is it really? I don't know, man. I don't know. I bet it's close. I bet it's close. So you got a lot of that. That informs your idea of what the world is, how it works. Yeah. That's weird. He thinks that's real. Something to think about. For next time, more Vonnegut. Chapter 5. It is, I think, and I'm using my memory here, I believe chapter 5 is the longest in the book. I do apologize. There's no good way, I'll tell you now, there's no good way to break up a book for like 2.5 weeks, however long it is I give you to read this. There's no good way to do it. What I would suggest, and you can't do this before Thursday, read what you're able to do. You can do that part. But then figure out your schedule. If you go past chapter 5, hey man, go nuts. You know, But like, figure out a schedule that works for you to read the book. Because if you try to go along with the syllabus, I worry sometimes you just get behind and then you just stay behind. That's not a good place to be. But reading chapter 5 for Thursday, I'm going to admit to you, is kind of a lot. I think it's like 60 pages. I know. Good God, 30 pages a day, hardship. But look, I'm also giving you 2.5 weeks to read a book. I just think you can do it. I think you can do it. And if you haven't started, by the way, Jesus Christ. All right, that's all I got. Thank you guys. I'll see you then.